Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the reading of Bonfire. So today we're going to be reading chapter 7. So we've now are going to be heading to France. Okay. All right, chapter 7 of Bonfire by Susan Raby-Dunne. The major began to rush about, organizing and reorganizing his kit, which was in 2 piles on the ground, in front of the barn at the back of the Bear Inn in De Vries. Back and forth he went, talking quietly to himself. I'll need that, and I won't need that, and that thing is useless. In the last case, he referred to Minister Hugh's secretary's invention, the macadam's shovel. It was an entrenching tool with a hole in it. Supposedly could be used to dig, but also to fire a gun through. The major held it up and looked at Dodge through the off-center teardrop-shaped hole. What do you think, Dodge? Dodge wrinkled his nose. Nothing better than a shovel with a hole in the middle of it, don't you think? The major laughed, but Dodge did not. Someone's making money off that useless article, Dodge said with disgust. You're absolutely right, and I'm pretty sure I know who it is, but I'll keep that to myself. Another voice piped up. Captain Cosgrave appeared suddenly, and leaned against my neck and twiddled my mane as Dodge brushed my back and rump. Would it be the self-same purveyors of the Ross rifle, do you think? Cosgrave asked with an impish glint in his eye. Cosgrave! The major looked up from his medical bag. You rascal! Both men laughed. And don't disparage the Ross rifle yet. It'll be proven on the battlefield. Where's the colonel? He's gone to HQ for last-minute orders. He was packed and ready to go last night. A small, curly-haired private appeared with a bag full of mail. Mail call, Major McCrae. And he handed the major several letters. There was none for Dodge. Thank you, Private. I suppose we'll be in France next time we get mail. The major opened a letter while Cosgrave sat on a bench against the barn wall and lit a cigarette. The major began to read and then laughed out loud. It's from Mother. She asks, how are the McCrae boys? He laughed again and walked over to me and gave my forehead a scratch. How do you like that, Bonfire? We are now the McCrae boys. Seems fitting to me, said Cosgrave with a grin. Just then Colonel Morrison rode up on King and dismounted. He handed the King's reins to Dodge as his man was away attending to other duties. Right, you men, organize yourselves and get around front for an official photograph of the officers of the 1st Brigade CFA. He looked at his pocket watch. For the photographer will be here in 10 minutes. I could sense excitement emanating from the colonel, overlain by determination and discipline. But his enthusiasm was evident all the same. For a hastily organized photograph session, they were a smart-looking group of men as they stood in front of the Bear Inn. A small but starchy Colonel Morrison in the middle reminded me of a feisty little bantam rooster Dr. Todd had when I was a colt. As soon as the photo was snapped and everyone scattered and shifted into high gear, and we prepared to move out for our ship. Again, like our trip from Portsmouth to Salisbury Plain, there was no marching or riding, as time was short. We were packed onto trains again and headed southwest for the coast. This time, King and I were in luxurious adjoining box stalls, full of clean bedding. It was heaven, for a few hours anyway. Led by Dodge, I was up the plank and onto the SS African Prince without another bother. It was February 9th, 1915. I felt like I was getting to be an old hand at this sailing business. Our trip was to be short, only a couple of days long, around the Bay of Biscay and to the port of Saint-Nazaire, France, at the bottom of the Brittany coast. Other horses were in various states of fitness after the ordeal on the Salisbury Plain. Most of the serious cases, who had not been put out of their misery, had somewhat recovered, but still had a ways to go. I saw Thor with the other gun and limber-pulling horses, and he was still thin, but his coat was almost back to its slick, dark bay sheen. Magnus and Monty were perfectly well. Mules are tough creatures. Lex Helmer had gotten a new horse after his first one had died, another bright chestnut like me. Not quite as good-looking as myself, I don't mind saying. Bit of a Roman nose. And the only white was a short left sock. Still, it was a steady, sensible horse, and there's good value in that. A strong wind blew as we set off. It was said that the ship's usual run was around Cape Horn at the bottom of Africa, so she was well suited to nasty weather. This offered some comfort. On the other hand, we had no British war cruisers escorting us this time. Like we did sailing across from Canada, everyone hoped we'd see no sign of German submarines. The weather was terrible all night. Men were seasick and horses badly knocked about. The Major came to visit me once, but it was less dangerous if everyone stayed put. Luckily, by morning, the sea had calmed considerably, and everyone was glad of it. We sighted land on the 11th, and by the next morning, after a quiet night on board, we were ready to disembark. Back on trains we went, 8 horses and 2 men to a car. It was quite comfortable this time, and our rations were excellent. Good hay, and oats too. After the great oat famine, as I like to call it, on the Salisbury Plain, we horses were all deliriously happy about this. It took 2 more days to get to our first billets. The train stopped at intervals, and we were led off for a stretch and had a drink of water. The Major himself took me for water once, which was very nice. And he also gave me treats, of course. This time it was sugar lumps and half an apple. Yes! Just before we got to Steenwreck, where there was a good place to detrain for good. An excitable gelding beside me was frightened by a pigeon that flew into our train and out again. So, what did the scatterbrain do? Lashed out sideways with a back hoof and kicked me a good one in the right hind leg. It really smarted and soon began to throb with pain. By the time Dodge came and took me out for the Major to ride to our billet, it was bloody and swollen to the size of a grapefruit. The Major saw it immediately and swore, "Oh, for God's sake." He looked around for someone, human or equine, to blame, but by then everyone was moving off and no blame was to be laid. Well, Bonfire, we'll ride to our billet anyway, and that will keep it from getting stiff at least. Sorry, old chap. He rubbed my ears by way of apology. Ear rubs make up for almost any transgression. I resolved just to buck up and get on with it. Within a mile or 2, it did feel better, and just to be moving in any case. We hadn't ridden out since days ago in DeVries. I was soon enjoying it so much that I forgot my injury. For a little while, at least. Okay, so that, ladies and gentlemen, is Chapter 7 of Bonfire. So there are a couple of items I would like to mention about this chapter. So you heard mentioned the McAdams shovel and the Ross rifle. The McAdams shovel, if you go and look it up on the internet, you will see it's a shovel with a hole in it. And the whole purpose of the McAdams shovel was, as talked about, to dig your trenches, but then to be held up in front of you when you put your gun through it, so that way you could shoot through the trenches and the part of the shovel would protect you. However, the problem was it wasn't a very good shovel because there was a hole in it, so you'd dig and then all the dirt would fall through the hole. But the metal of the shovel was not strong enough at all to protect the men from incoming bullets. And it was heavy. It was 5 pounds. So these poor soldiers were lugging around 5 pounds of useless shovel with them, and it caused a lot of grief to the men. The Ross rifle as well also caused a lot of grief in the field. So when in a target range, the Ross rifle was excellent. It was very, very accurate and very good. But the problem was the Ross rifle was not designed for war conditions. The Ross rifle was not very durable. And if you fired the gun too many times, it would jam. And then you'd have to stop in the middle of a battle and unjam your gun to then get it going to start shooting again to have it jam. So it caused a lot of problems. And so because in battle, you want a gun that's really, really durable, doesn't need to be cleaned very often, and you can fire again and again and again and still keep firing while its temperature is really hot. So, which is where the British had a firearm, the Lee Enfield. Their rifle was incredibly good. And various variations of the Lee Enfield, the British military rifle, are in both World War I and then again later in World War II. And that's what my grandfather carried, was the Lee Enfield. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys enjoyed today's reading of Bonfire. And hope you also got a bit of a insight as well about how the gear and materials that soldiers have makes a really big difference to their success and survival. All right, so we will see you guys next time. Have a good afternoon. Bye.